I think it's important because every aspect of a death penalty case has really heightened scrutiny from the beginning appointment all the way to the sentencing. And here we have a case that was returned by the appellate division, actually was first denied and then reconsidered and then returned. So there are a lot of people that have a lot of interest in making sure this case gets done right. First of all, of course, the prosecutor, but then we have all the victims' families and all the relatives and friends and everybody that's getting involved. All of these years are part of the trial that we're now trying to conclude.
Actually rather colorful is kind of boring to listen to. We were thinking, what's the jury think about all this?
It's very trying. I mean, I think sitting on any jury is very challenging because while we get to see the exciting parts and the parts that go on long crime or the exciting parts, there's a lot of monotonous testimony, there's a lot of downtime. So here we have people that are sitting listening to a recording because it's a new jury. And you're right, he's talking about, now I think we're on the third victim. And you hear things like how he dragged her, and that's compelling. But then you get into little things like what was she wearing and what time of the day it was. And it's very challenging, I think, to follow.
It's so easy.
We have to remember first, she was still working in the other district attorney's office. But also, from my understanding, the investigation that led to this trial began in part because Blatcher wanted to give his wife, who was then working for his office, like a 30% raise. And that kind of set off bells and alerted some people, so they started investigating it. Then we have this transfer to other offices. So she was, first of all, we don't know what her salary was when she was transferred, if she did or didn't get this raise. But then she was transferred to this other office where she's now working. And the thing about it is, you know, Cindy testified that not only did she not have to work, she didn't have to go in, which sounds like a perfect job to me. I would love a job like that. There's no way to deny that the right to choose is deeply woven in the fabric of our law and society, and this is just a logical extension of that. Issues that come into college campuses, especially private universities, would be considered private funding, and most of the federal funding, which may later becoming an issue with this kind of statute, is directed to the students themselves. There are billions of dollars that go to research and development grants to schools, but largely it's going to be private funding.
Okay, let's go to Bernadette right now and let's take a look.
Well, I think it's interesting. You know, as a defense attorney, you're always going to try to poke holes into the prosecution's case. But I think even more important than those points is the testimony from Megan herself, as you alluded to. You know, if she were to get on the stand and say, you know, you're the person that shot me in the leg, or you're the one that shot and killed my husband, I think that would have been the literal nail on her coffin. But she didn't say that. And what she did say was that she couldn't, or at least didn't want to, identify the assailants. And I think that's going to really, really play large into the defense position here. So there's always questions surrounding authenticity, admissibility, and then also just credibility. You know, how many times have you seen a Facebook post from somebody saying something about how great their life is, but then you get to know the person's really not that case? So the mere fact that they posted something that may have suggested their involvement doesn't necessarily mean that it's accurate. Well, I mean, to some extent, certainly. If you are engaged in a dangerous activity like that, or even playing with a loaded gun in any way, you're certainly assuming some of the risk. That doesn't necessarily negate the fact that the other two individuals who were involved didn't cause or create a dangerous situation that led to his death. Well, and it's going to be a troubling defense because, you know, we know what Russian roulette is supposed to suggest, but we don't really know what happened here yet. So it's going to be really important to find out how he died, where the gun came from, whose fingerprints are on there. I think once these pieces start to come together through the testimony and in the media, then we'll have a better sense of where the case is going to go.
Fallout be for the president?
Well, it's difficult to say because it's just coming out now, and my understanding of some of the research and comments is that there are other tapes that are going to follow. So I think as they come out and develop, we'll get more information. But there's also been issues about campaign financing and issues that may be involved with these alleged payoffs that I think could become either civil penalties, once in a while, even criminal penalties.
And criminal penalties because of not only campaign finance laws, but if Cohen is suggesting that he perhaps misrepresented to a bank when he got a loan to help pay this off. If he was misrepresenting what this was for, and he can now say, oh, and by the way, I told this guy, Donald Trump, what it was really for, then there's a conspiracy that could be alleged involving Donald Trump.
Could be. I'm not sure. I haven't heard much about the conspiracy, so it's an interesting point. I know there is big questions about anything of value being exchanged, whether it was by Cohen on Trump's behalf or from Trump back to Cohen. So I think as we find out what these payments were or were not for, whether they were to foster the campaign or whether they were personal payments, I think is going to determine whether or not there's a conspiracy.
But I guess to my question, apparently,
if you listen to the defendant's opening statement, the counsel goes through a ton of people that he's planning to call, all these people that were involved in the fight. There was a toxicology report that says that there was PCP in the victim's bloodstream, and apparently none of that came out. I'm assuming that maybe the prosecutor just missed a significant element and the defense decided just to go on that and not to push opening the door. I don't think it has anything to do with it. I'm actually surprised that it was found to be relevant whatsoever. But we have to assume this issue was raised pre-trial, and normally you would exclude evidence that's not relevant. So there had to be some showing that it would tie into it. Now, I know from the defense opening argument, at least, that they were trying to allege that Corey sort of instrumental in creating this, that he brought Muhammad in for the purpose of this fight. So maybe they were trying to tie together the kind of person that Corey is, having this violent past, and is more likely to have done something like this. But it's a barroom brawl. And even though they talk about how intent isn't necessarily required, you can't fault a person for possibly defending himself, which is another claim, because something tragic resulted from it. So I don't think the jury finds murder or voluntary manslaughter. When he left the first time, it's alleged that Vasquez threw some bottles at him. He could have just kept going. Richter. Right. He could have just kept going. Wimpy could have just kept going. But he decided to return. And that's when everything went bad. So I think the jury is going to be faced with a tough question of whether or not he should have left, and by his returning, did he actually then take more of an aggressive, more of an intentional stand to cause harm? I think so. I think it'd be more reasonable to suspect that maybe Wimpy was more aggressive than necessary, used more violence than reasonably necessary. But here, you can't doubt that Vasquez was going after Wimpy and not after Richter in any way.
Yeah.
I mean, if you work with a foreign national and you get something of value to your campaign, that's against the law.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's playing semantics with the American people, and when it comes out, it's not going to be well received, because collusion is just planning to defraud, where conspiracy is planning to do something unlawful. So it's a word choice. So instead of using collusion, we spell it as conspiracy, and we have a crime. So I don't think it's going to really fall too well if that does later come out that there's a conspiracy. Everybody's talking about that there's supposed to be no tie to the Russian investigation in the Manafort trial, but that's actually not accurate entirely, because I think there was a pretrial decision that states that there was one conversation with a bank officer where he was promised influence in either the campaign or after the election. So there's going to be a thread that's going to tie this Manafort trial possibly to the collusion and the Russian investigation.
Let's talk about the trials. 12 jurors, 6 men, 6 women. How could anyone guarantee that they're impartial given the wall-to-wall coverage of the Russia investigation?
I don't think anybody can be completely impartial. I mean, you're hoping that you're as impartial as possible and that you can separate the facts from your own personal beliefs. But everybody from the judge to the jurors to the attorneys, they're all people. We're all going to go in with our preconceived ideas, and it's going to influence how we view the testimony and the ultimate decision.
Like, fake news is one thing, actually encouraging somebody to be body slammed is another. Why is it that the president can't simply say to those media, look, I don't like those people in the back of the room. They don't give me a fair shake. Those reporters, they're biased. All that's fine. But to have to go and say, and I love this guy who body slammed a reporter. I mean, it does cross a line, doesn't it?
I don't think so.
Really?
I think Hillary threw down a gauntlet when she said we can't be civil unless we win. I mean, how was it appropriate for her to say that, but not
But she
Trump?
wasn't singling out a specific case of violence towards a reporter.
I don't think he was singling out a case of violence. I think he was supporting an individual who had been found.
Who had a specific case of violence against one single reporter.
Right, but I think he was supporting him, not his act. I would prefer to have a president who spoke more presidential.
Good. Okay.
I grew up with that. I'm used to that, and I encourage it. But we don't have that. At least we have somebody who speaks, and we know where he's speaking from. We know what he believes and what he doesn't believe. And if you support him, you can stand behind him. If you don't, you can stand against him. But at least you know where you need to stand.
And people are really sick of politically correctness.
Brad, let me start with you. I presume a Republican or rightward leaning in this process, do you feel like it's been done properly?
It's hard to say because it's still playing out, but I think there's been a lot of delays and people are becoming suspect of what's causing the delays. Like even a moment ago, there was a spot that there's an agreement to testify, but there's really not an agreement to testify because the terms are unclear. So nobody really knows where it's going to go from this point.
Quickly, each of you, how does this play out over the next week? Does Brett Kavanaugh get confirmed? We'll start with you, Brad.
I believe the judge will be confirmed. This is an act that alleges to have occurred when he was a juvenile, and fundamental to our system of juvenile justice is rehabilitation. And for him to have rose to this level, to be nominated to the Supreme Court, suggests that he's been rehabilitated, if in fact it is true. So I don't think there's any problem with this confirmation.
Brad, Eric, and Alex, thank you for your expertise. Good stuff. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Joining me now, Brad Micklin. He is a family law attorney, and Carol Roth is back with us as well. Now, Brad, you did this on a more personal, face-to-face level. What are the impediments? In other words, when someone finally comes to see you and you say, what took you so long? What do they tell you?
Well, they have a lot of different excuses, and we see even with the long list of people that you name, because don't forget we have Prince also, whose litigation is still ongoing regarding his estate. So we have Prince, we have the Queen of Soul. It's like the royal family of music, and nobody's giving good advice. And I think the main reason for these kind of people, the people in their inner circle like to stay in their inner circle, and nobody likes to talk about death. So if you have a high-profile client who doesn't like to talk about death, you're not going to do it. But what you're doing is you're leaving their friends, their family, and even yourself with a slew of problems, both tax and legal problems that they're going to have to deal with.
You're a lawyer. We've got no corroborating evidence on both sides. We've got the testimony that both sides are going to say tomorrow. They've already put that out, the prepared testimony. As a lawyer, what would you be looking for?
Well, it's a challenging question. In a case like this, there's always a lot of balancing interests. The victims that are coming forward, they have rights to be protected and to have their time in court and to be heard, and even in this process. But so do the accusers. Brett Kavanaugh and his family, they also have a right to be heard. They have a right to be defended. And we can't lose sight of the fact that our country promises innocent until proven guilty. And that's going to be the first thing that I think we need to look at.
What would due process actually look like for both sides?
Well, that's another challenging question because it depends where we are. In the confirmation hearing, some people question whether or not it's even appropriate to be talking about these issues. If there were assaults, there's a criminal process. I believe in Maryland, where the first allegation from Dr. Ford originated, has no statute of limitations on certain sexual assaults. So due process would be in that forum. So depending on what we hear tomorrow, not really sure where the next step will be.